So this topic of this presentation, as you can see, grazing facilities and sustainable grazing management. And this is the very last session for this series, Sustainable Year-Round Pasture and Grazing Virtual Training Series. So after this is completed, I will be coming up with another series sometime later. So let me begin with the grazing facility. So first of all, when you're talking about the grazing facility, there should be the pastures, or if we are using other grazing lands like shallow pasture or woodland grazing or some other form of grazing, there should be that facility. Without having pasture or other grazing lands, we cannot talk about the grazing facilities or grazing. So there should be enough acreage for the number of animals we are having, we are raising, and if we want them to be based on grazing, there should be enough forages and vegetation ready for grazing before we bring the animals into those plots. Those vegetation must have enough biomass to support the nutrient requirement of those animals, and also the good quality and palatability for the type of animals we use for grazing. And basically, multiple variety will provide better biomass production as well as the better quality based on the several experiments we have conducted and other scientists have conducted in other parts of the world. And also, if we are raising small ruminants like sheep and goat, we shouldn't forget about browse species, as we have already talked about the role of browse for small ruminants, nutrition as well as their health. It should be the part of the grazing system if we are raising small ruminants. So right now, in the traditional grazing system, we basically forget about browse, like small ruminants are raised in the kind of a cattle production system. So if we include browse, especially for goats, because they prefer more browse compared to the ground vegetation based on their behavior, and that is based on our study as well as the studies reported from over the world. So that should be important component in the grazing land for small ruminants. So this is the kind of the growth condition of the vegetation, browse as well as the ground vegetation. Over here you can see in this picture that I am just trying to show you the full canopy has to be developed. Basically, their vegetative growth should be completed before animals are brought to the plot. If not the 100%, maybe 80%, 85% of the vegetative growth. Vegetative growth means their leaves should be fully grown before we bring the animals there. So this is just an example of pasture that include the crimson clover and the grass mix. And you can see over here, the forages are grown up to the knee height. And this is the time that animals should be brought and let the animals graze in this kind of field. There, our dear farmer, Jernigan, Mrs. Jernigan there, unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago, but she used to be our participant farmer and participated in improving her grazing land. So fence is another required facility for containing the animal into the facility. So perimeter fence should be strong to contain the animals into the property as well as to prevent the wild animals or neighborhood dogs coming into the facility, or the people coming to your facility. It should be strong, it should be tall enough, so those possibilities will be minimized or avoided. And big gate for bringing in and out all the vehicle and equipment that you should be using for operating that land, for transporting the animals, for planting the vegetation or forages. So think about all that and plan how big should be the gate and all that, and what kind of perimeter fence you can afford and should be. Over here, just the example given. I have also shown this in our previous presentation with the agroforestry series group, and you can see the very simple design. This is all the perimeter fence around and the cross fence inside that, and the driveway inside the perimeter fence. And there is a gate to go to plot 1, another gate to go to plot 4, going to plot 2 and plot 3. So you may put gate somewhere else, maybe in other corners, depending on where will be convenient for you to get in and out, to get the animals in and out from each plot, to drive around, to bring your equipment and other supplies that are needed for animals. So that is one of the design. So another design over here, this is just the one plot. Just you will see in the continuous grazing system, just one whole big pasture. There is one gate getting into the field, and all the animals will be there, no cross section. So if you do not develop your grazing facility, just depend on a continuous grazing system, the scenario will be like this. So over here is another scenario, the outer border with the perimeter fence, and then you just cross fence attached to the perimeter fence without having any driveway around inside the perimeter fence. So that can be another design. So you may design your own. I'm just giving you some insight what can be done. Couple of examples. So anything you do, you have to design your facility appropriate for the type of animal, and also those gates big enough for bringing animals in and out, as well as the equipment and vehicle in and out for operating the facility appropriately. So another requirement for the grazing facility, for the grazing animals, watering facility, they must have a 24/7 supply of clean drinking water. You can see over here the water trough and watering line just attached to the trough. So also there is a regulatory valve. When the water goes down to a certain level, it fills on its own. If you have that kind of system, but you should be mindful cleaning that water every couple of days. You can see already here there are leaves, and if it is not clean time to time, there will be a lot of algae accumulated and water will be dirty. So if you fix the container, you should have some system to clean it when it gets dirty, because animal has to have a provision of clean drinking water 24/7. Also think about during the cool days, if it is possible, the water trough should be to be placed somewhere where it is sunny, so the water get warmer, not very cold or chilly. And during the summer, when it is very hot, if it is some shade there, some trees, place the water trough under those shades, so it will remain cool. And animal also would like to go and drink in that area during the summer, during the hot days, so they can also cool down under the shade and drink water from there. So another feature you can see around the water trough, this is gravel put out to make it hard surface so the animals will not be messing with the soil and causing the soil erosion. Also, this kind of gravel will be helpful to worn out the overgrown hoof of animals. When they walk over that gravel, the hoof will be worn out, naturally trimmed, so you will not be um, having to trim animals that often, and that will be healthier hoof. And if you do not put this kind of gravel around the drinking water, it will be messy, and all the mud may get into the hoof between the soft tissue and the hoof tissue there. So there will be more chance of getting the unhealthy hoof. So if you have big number of animals, you may want to put a big trough. If you have just a few animals, just put a small trough. Also, you need to think about if you have small kids, and if you keep that trough, big trough full of water all the time, maybe sometimes kids may get into and get drowned. You have to keep a close eye on that kind of situation. So another type of facility is mineral feeding facility, and that also should be appropriate for the type of animal we are talking about. For small ruminants, we recommend loose minerals, loose mineral mix, and the mineral feeders should have a canopy to protect the minerals from the rain and strong sunlight. Over here, you can see two examples, this one and another one over here. So for the large ruminant, if we are talking about cattle or non-ruminant like horses or donkey, if we have those kind of animal, we can easily supply the mineral block made for that animal, that kind of animal. And also when you provide the loose minerals, salt block will be useful. Just put in that mineral feeder or on a separate feeder the salt block you can see in here, this white salt block there. So whichever mineral you do, you have to always think about what kind of animal I am buying the mineral for, because there are different kind of mineral available in the market. There are goat minerals formulated for goats, sheep minerals formulated for sheep, cattle minerals formulated for cattle, horse mineral formulated for horse. So you need to talk to your feed store or your cooperatives co-op shop which is available in your neighborhood or in your area. Or if you are an online shopper, you can also look for those different kind of minerals and think about which kind of animal you are raising and whether you are buying the appropriate minerals for your animals. Mineral feeding is very important because all the forages that are growing and animal have access to it may not provide the enough amount of minerals, or it may not provide some of the mineral at all. So that's why it is a common practice to provide the appropriate type of minerals to the animals. Hay feeder may be necessary if we need to feed hay, and basically during a certain time of the year, hay feeding looks necessary in our area, like January, February at least. So you need to have appropriate type of hay feeder. And for if you have a cattle, you may get this kind of hay feeder over here. Or if you have goats, this kind of hay feeder you can buy or build your own. And there's another example of hay feeder for goats which do not have a canopy. So having a canopy is also very important to protect the hay from rain and direct sunlight. So you may build your own canopy, a small hay feeding shed in your facility somewhere. or provide them the mobile kind of feeder. Wherever you move the animals, you have to move the hay feeder and feed the hay. So another facility is concentrate feeder. I am just showing this hay feeder that I showed in the earlier slide because it has the facility for feeding the concentrate there. Down below over here, these goats are eating the concentrate or grain from this the portion down here, and the hay put out here and canopy. For cattle, this is one of the feeder that I just copied from the Tractor Supply website, but you may go and find out your local store or shop online, or you may build custom on your own that you can do. But whichever feeder you have, you would like to have, you just think about your animals, how many animals, and it should be big enough so that every animal must have opportunity to eat that grain or concentrate when you provide to them. If you have a very small, they may fight together, they may hurt each other. So you need to think about all that. Handling facility. So animal handling, you have to have a moment. Sometimes animal get sick, sometimes you may have to do medication, sometimes you may have to just catch and shell them. So if you don't have a handling facility, it will be a hard time to harvest animals, to collect animals and work with them. So it also you'll need to think about the appropriate facility for the type of animal you have been raising. And if you can put the canopy, it will be beneficial when you have to work, when it is raining or when it is very hot. Otherwise, even if you don't have a canopy, at least you have to have some facility to contain the animal and work with them. There are lots of animal handling facilities that are available in the market. However, you may just design and make your own using some cattle panel or there's some fence wire, and make it useful for what works for you. And it will be useful to put the gravel on the floor there as well in the handling facility and around, so it will be not very messy. Also, it will naturally trim the overgrown hoof of the animals. Weighing scale is another required facility that all animal producer must have, because when you have to medicate your animal, most of the medicine is depending on their live weight. So if we just estimate without knowing the exact live weight, we may be under dosing the animal or overdosing, and that has the consequences. Okay, so also giving the feed also, we have to give based on how much is required, and that will depend on their weight. Also, when you shell the animal, for pricing, how much the animal weigh, and it will be better for you to arrive at the appropriate price for sale. Also, to measure the animal performance, like growth rate, birth weight of the animal, if you are, especially if you are a breeder, those kind of characteristics will be important for the buyer, and you will be able to tell them this is the birth weight, this is the growth rate. By winning, this animal weigh this much. So that kind of data will be useful even for you. What is the cost, what is the income, what is the possibility of the animal going forward? All that data will speak. So weighing scale is important. Shade and shelter for grazing animals, for animal comfort. If you have a shade trees in the grazing land, it will provide the shade for animals, make the microclimatic condition milder as compared to the plots where there is no tree. An animal will perform better, animal will eat better, stress is reduced. And as you know, there is a lot of consequences of animal stress. including their poor health and performance if animals are always stressed. And as you know, Alabama has like 3-4 months very hot weather. In that kind of situation, if we have a shade trees in the grazing land, it will be comforting to animals. Also, the shelter is required, especially for small ruminants, for their protection from rain and extreme weather condition, their comfort. Even if you have a shade tree, you may think, why do I need a shelter? Because when it is raining, animal, especially small ruminant, do not like to be wet. And sometimes if it is chilly, very cold, and if they get wet, they will develop pneumonia. Although the cattle facility usually do not have shelter, but it is a good idea to have some kind of shelter and shade, provision of shade for cattle as well. So this is the overall scenario, just putting everything together. The mineral feeder over here, hay and concentrate feeder, watering facility, shelter here, and natural shade. Just wanted to show you the overall picture for animals, the grazing facility. So other facility would be quarantine facility, and that should be away from the grazing plot and rest of the animals. So when animals are suspected for any health problems, or if they are sick, they should be separated and treated until they get better. Similarly, new arrivals, if you go and buy animals and you do not know their health status, even if you know, it may be going through some of the health problem, we don't know. So it is always recommended to keep that animal, that new arrivals, for a month or so in the quarantine facility and observe how they behave, whether they show any health problems. And then after that, for a month, if they do not show any health concern, then you may mix to your other animals in your farm. If you don't know the health history, you may check. You may take some samples when they are in quarantine, maybe fecal sample or blood samples if you suspect something. And then if all the lab reports come all right, then you may bring those animals from quarantine to your farm. So another facility, storage facility, to keep all the medicine, vaccine. You might want to have a separate refrigerator in the storage facility for your animals. Feed and grain storage, especially you cannot just go to the store and bring the feed every day. Maybe you need some kind of storage facility. Similarly, minerals, storing minerals and storing hay and other supplies. Those you will need some storage facility. All right, with that about the facilities, let me go ahead and talk about the sustainable grazing management. So this is the objective of grazing management. The overall objective: maximize the forage utilization that are available in the plot, maximize per acre gain. We would like to have more gain per acre than per animal, and minimize damage to forages, and maintain pasture health and persistence so that pasture will be there year after year. So by doing all this, our overall objective is, one is making profit, another is making the whole production system sustainable. When we talk about sustainable, we talk about profit, we talk about socially good, we talk about no harm for the farm family or the society, and environmentally very sound. That we talk about sustainability. So when you think about your production system, your animal production system all the time. That sustainability you shouldn't forget. So let me go ahead and talk about the grazing system. One is continuous grazing system. That means we put animals in one plot throughout the grazing season. We are not moving those animals anywhere else. Another is rotational grazing, that you will have multiple plots and you would be rotating animals among those plots depending on the how much forage available at each time. And specialized grazing, that could be strip grazing, creep grazing, forward creep, limit grazing, first and last grazer, and guarded grazing, that I'll talk about briefly about each of them in the coming slides. So this is the scenario of continuous grazing system. You have the whole pasture, perimeter fence all around to contain the animals in the facility, but there is no sections to rotate the animals. So this kind of grazing system is continuous grazing system. So in the rotational grazing system, pasture is subdivided. There will be multiple sections of that pasture, and animals are allowed to graze rotationally among those paddocks. So managers or farmers have good control over the animals, where and when to put those animals in which plots. And it will require more initial investment, since that will involve cross fencing and putting the gates, and installing the facility like watering facility, mineral feeding facilities, and all that. However, this system is desirable under different situations that we'll discuss in the coming slide over here. And this is the scenario of rotational grazing system. So this is just example having 4 plots. So in this system, all the animals in the herd or flock put in one section at a time, and let them finish all the available forages in that plot. And once the 50% or so foliage of that vegetation available in that plot, they all are taken out of that plot and move to the next plot where there are a good forage available. So when we move the animals from this plot, the forages, the remaining forages, forage stubble and soil will have a chance to recover. So this gives a chance for the plants and their soil to recover. In the continuous system, animals will go just wherever they want, and they just eat whatever they want to eat. No control over the animals by the manager or the farmer. So strip grazing is the example when we have a very dense forages or not a uniform paddock. This is temporary one along maybe some kind of fencing you'll put there and let the animal graze in this portion. When they finish, then you move this strip of fence to the new line and let the animal graze that. So basically it is practice when the forage is very dense, especially like stockpiling scenario, when there is a lot of forage there. If we put the animals at once, they will just trample and damage the forages. So to avoid that, strip grazing will be very, very useful. Creep grazing is this is the concept: put a small gate where only the young animals or small animals can go and eat the fresh forages, and the large animals will be prevented going there. So large animals you can let them graze after the small animals or young animals finish grazing that fresh leaves. So another is first and last grazer. First grazer always should be the animals in a very high nutrient demand. That can be the young growing animals or lactating animals. And after they finish, you can move them to the new plot with the fresh forages and put the other animals like dry animals or adult animals after that. So example here given, last grazer could be dry does or cows in that system, first and last grazer. And limit grazing is graze for a limited time. If you have a small portion with the high quality forages, and you may not be able to let the animals graze that plot the whole time, then you may allow those animals to graze that kind of plot for maybe 2 hours, 3 hours a day, and move them out from that plot so that they will not be trampling, and bring those in the next couple of days or next day. That way you can provide the quality forages without damaging much forages in that high quality plot. The guarded grazing, and this is practice when there is basically no fencing, or when there is a lot of browsy species or species of your interest where you do not know whether animals would be damaging those plants or not. So you may just let the animal to those kind of plots and watch them, and then move away if they are going to attack those plants of your interest. So over here, those were debarked by those animals. So we practice guarded grazing. If they came to eat those saplings, then this portion here move those animals away just for a limit grazing, guarded grazing. So for a couple of hours on a day, that way it will minimize the overgrowth of the ground forages and let that sapling grow in their plot. Or you can apply that in different scenario that may be much different than that what have been shown in these plots. So which grazing system will work for you? So there are a couple of scenarios that I would like to share with you, and that will be helpful for you to make decision. So if you have prostrate species like Bermuda grass, Bahia grass in the whole pasture, and you don't have any way of cross fencing those for rotational grazing, it is okay to apply the continuous grazing if the whole pasture is just the one species of this prostrate, which remain close to the ground. Most of their leaves remain close to the ground. That's what I meant by prostrate species, and these are the examples. That forest damage will not be that much on the prostrate species because of the continuous grazing. So if you have a semi-erect species, such as in the picture you can see orchard grass here, most of the leaves close to the ground, but their reproductive portion coming out of the ground level, and here is the tall fescue. So these are examples of semi-erect species, and for these species, controlled grazing is necessary, unlike the prostrate species. And erect species which grow erect from the ground level, if you see over here, there is not much leaves close to the ground, most of the leaves above the ground. So this kind of species, controlled grazing is required. So it also depends on what kind of forages you have in your field to decide which kind of grazing system you need to have. Control grazing, I mean rotational or the limit grazing, strip grazing, that kind of control grazing. I meant that you have some kind of control over where to put animals. So if you have mixed species forages planted in your pasture, also the control grazing is required. As you can see over here, crimson clover, hairy vetch, and then ryegrass, annual ryegrass. Okay, so since rotational grazing is very commonly practiced And let me go ahead and talk about a little bit more about rotational grazing. Again, just to remind ourselves what rotational grazing looks like. This is the picture. And as I have already talked about, cross fencing is required for practicing the rotational grazing because we need to create different section out of the big pasture field. And you see the this cross fencing over here, and goats are grazing in one of the plots right now. So the question may come, is rotational grazing better? So it depends. If it is a heterogeneous pasture, yes. But if you have just Bahia grass or Bermuda grass pasture, big field, and you don't want to develop rotational grazing, or if you don't have that initial investment to develop the rotational grazing, maybe if you keep that stocking rate at an appropriate level, maybe you can go with the continuous grazing. However, if you have a heterogeneous pasture, having a different forages in some of the sections than the other, then yes, rotational grazing is better. Also, the forage species, as I have already talked about, which forage species you have, those semi-erect, erect species, mixed forages, those require the rotational grazing. Rotational grazing is better in those cases. Mixed species pasture, rotational grazing better. If you are irrigating the pasture and if you still have the animals in that plot, then that will be not good because the animal will be going there and trampling the soil, and it will be the big mess. It will damage all the forages present there. That's why if you irrigate the pasture, that rotational grazing is better. And ration grazing, if you have to ration graze, if you don't have enough forages, you just want to let the animal graze just a certain portion or for a limited time, then rotational grazing better. In the continuous system, grazing system, you will not have that option. And dairy herd, rotational grazing is considered better because they socialize more, and the studies have shown that dairy production will be higher when they socialize better. And also for handling the animals, since you will have animals all in one paddock, you can just bring those animals at once from a smaller section, and then just milk or treat or whatever you need to do and let the animals go again. So for those two reasons, for dairy animals, rotational grazing is better. So the question, how many paddocks you will need for practicing the rotational grazing system, we talk about here. So it depends on how long is the recovery period for the forages that you have in the grazing system in your pasture. So basically, most of the forages grown in Alabama, that varies from 21 to 35 days. Once we finish rotating one paddock, it will need at least 21 days to recover and come back and develop the full canopy to 35 days under the situation when these forages have enough nutrients and moisture and the good weather condition for their growth. So the number of paddock will require depends on resting days required divided by grazing days and then +1. If you do that, then you'll come up with the number of paddock required for the forages that you have planted in your pasture. Okay, so over here, the calculation example, resting days for the forage type that you have, let's assume 30 days, grazing days, 5 days. That means you will put animals in one plot for 5 days. That's what the grazing days means. Assuming for the number of animals you have in that plot, 5 days will that plot would be providing enough forages for those animals for 5 days. So using the formula presented in the previous slide, now we need to calculate number of paddocks required for practicing the rotational grazing system, giving these two scenarios. So 30 divided by 5 plus 1. So 7 paddocks will be required on this scenario. So another just the concept I would like to present to you, and let's think about together. This showing time of the days, this graph, this showing the recovery period, and then these are the grazing period. So if you look at this chart over here, this is the number of paddock. If you have like 6 paddock, you'll have grazing days, how many? Like 5 days, and then recovery days almost to 25 days. And another scenario, if you go to like over here, 15 paddock if you have, and then again the recovery days will be like around little more than 25 days. So it is showing like if you have around 25 days of recovery period, any paddock, number of paddock increase beyond that will not give you many more days added for the recovery days. That's why like around if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So after the 8 paddock you have, the curve is really flat. That means based on the physiological phenomenon of the forages and the grazing and resting period for the given forage, it is really not giving you much of the advantage having more than 8 paddocks in your pasture for the forages, for the forage growth and rest. So when you do divide the paddock, what to consider? One is uniformity. You want to section off the one uniform area into a paddock. So if you have heterogeneous section within a paddock, again, the animal will be utilizing those portions which has better forage quality and variety. That's why you will need to have the uniform section included in a paddock. Also the gauge. You have to think about while subdividing the portion, think about gauge, where to put water source, because all the time grazing animals must have access to water source. And then size, uniform size is recommended. Basically the size should have the enough productivity so that you can rotate among those plots at an kind of equivalent interval. That's why the size matters. However, if one portion is very productive, another is less productive, maybe the less productive size, maybe you may make a little bigger in the less productive side compared to the more productive site. And production capacity is the one that if you have all paddocks having the equal production capacity, that's what you need to look for, or just try to make each paddock having a equivalent production capacity. And the shape, so basically the rectangular or square shape is preferred when we make the paddock, so it will be easier to operate, put the gate, put the fence. That's why. So pasture management, now talk about that. When you have a different section in the rotational grazing, when do you plant all? Let's suppose if you have 8 paddocks, and when do you plant those paddocks? Are you going to plant all those together? So if you do that, you need to think about how you are going to manage those forages, because all the forages will be available at the same time, will be ready at the same time. So you need to think about that. When do you want to plant all those 8 paddocks? Do you want to just section like 4 paddocks, you plant 1 week before the other? Or are you going to plant all at once and move the animals quicker? So they will be just grazing the first growth and then again rotating the animal sooner than you do if you had planted at different times. Also, the forage height is very, very important. That determines when to begin grazing and when to end grazing in each paddock. So animal movement depends on the available forages. If you finish the forage available in the plot, need to move the animal quicker. If there are lots of forages growing all at once, also they need to move the animals quicker. And if they are growing slower, maybe you need to move the animals slower. So it depends on the how much forage available, how quickly forage are growing, and the forage harvest. If there is a lots of forages available beyond the capacity of your animals harvesting those forages, then you may have to separate some of the plots and cut hay and save those for feeding in during the winter. So let's talk about when to begin and end grazing, the very first point. So if these are the recommended beginning grazing height, when the average height of the forage stand, like for Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, and this is in inches. If they are 6 to 10 inches tall overall in your paddock, that's the time of grazing. And in grazing when it is 1 to 2 inch from the ground level. However, for a small ruminant, we recommend end grazing when the stubble height is 4 to 5 inches, because they are more susceptible to the gastrointestinal parasite, and give 10 to 20 days for recovery period for the Bahia grass pasture. And similarly, you can see the recommended beginning grazing height, ending grazing height, and then recovery period. Annual ryegrass, you can see 6 to 12 inch that you need to begin grazing when they turn 6 to 12 inch, and in grazing 2 to 4 inch. However, for all these forages, always remember, for small ruminants, for sheep, for goat, more so for goats than sheep, that end grazing always when the forage stubble becomes 4 to 5 inches from the ground level. Okay, so this concept, this is the take-home message for all of you. All the time, leaf volume of the forages should be left like more than 60% or at least 50%. So in this chart, it is showing leaf volume removed less than 40 or equivalent to 40. Root growth stoppage was 0. That means root growth was occurring normally. If when the leaf volume removed was 50%, stoppage of root growth 2 to 4%. And above that, this is the red line, because if we remove 60% of the leaf volume, see the effect on the root growth. And as you know, roots are very important for the regrowth of those forages. So if you are trying to harvest so much and thinking that I'm getting so much out of it, then in the next rotation, next growth, that will show you the result, because the root growth will stop. Okay, if you take more than 80% of the foliage, then 100% root growth will be stopped. So that means we are harming the plants. So always keep in mind, this is the baseline: 50% take, 50% leave. it is grazing. So even when we talk about browse, the same concept. If you can leave it like 40% taken, 60% left on the intact on the plant, that will be better. If you cannot, 50% is the bottom line. You shouldn't go above 50% of the leaf volume removed from the plant. Okay, this is just a reminder for you to remember 4 to 5 inch for the small ruminants, for stopping the grazing, ending grazing in that plot. So over here also would like to share with you when to begin grazing. You need to think about how is the forages stand in the paddock. Over here, these forages are still growing, not much vegetative growth completed here on the left. On the right, it is all grown. Most of the vegetative stage completed. This is the time grazing, beginning grazing, other than the height guidelines that we saw in the previous slide. Too mature to begin to grazing. Also think about when it becomes stemmy like this. This is very late to begin grazing. Two things. One, there will be a lot of forages will be not eaten. As you see, this plot is grazed by goats, and they have left lots of stem. Eaten leaves but stem, and when you go and look at the regrowth, there will be not much regrowth coming out of these kind of stemmy forages left. So we'll be not doing good job if we just wait until very late. So this is the right state to graze, and you can see a lot of reproductive growth taken place. All the seed head, there are seeds developing, already flowered. So this is very late to begin grazing. Also need to think about the forage quality. As forage mature, their fiber content will increase and protein content will decrease. That means the quality will go down. So we need to think about also from the quality perspective. If we wait until late, not only you will lose lots of forages, also will be the low quality forage available. To increase the quality, you may, other than harvesting on time, you may mix the legumes that I think we already talked about it. So for the dormancy, when forages go to dormancy, like warm season forage go dormant when it starts beginning cool, like late kind of towards the later part of October, early November. So we need to think about not grazing animals until they go dormant, because they need some time to store food for coming back again for their regrowth. So during the adverse weather condition, we shouldn't be putting animals into the plot. We better take the animals out of the those plots, grazing plots, and feed them with hay somewhere away from where forages will be growing. And stocking rate must match the available forages. You need to kind of do visually whether enough forage is there, or you may measure with the grazing stick. I'm just showing the picture there. And dry matter requirement depends on the animal production, different stages of the animals. So you need to take into consideration whether those animals are pregnant in advanced stage of pregnancy, whether they are having twins and lactating, early lactation. Then you need to provide more quality and quantity of feed, forages. So these are just the requirement, 2 to 6% of the body weight of the animals in general, mature and dry animals, if they are not in advanced pregnancy or lactating, 2% of the body weight of the dry matter. So lactating dairy goats, it is 6% of the body weight. So these are recommended for which is producing 15 to 21 pounds of milk. these are the examples just to think about. Also, too much feeding is not good. This graph is showing 80% maximum utilization, even little less than 80% maximum utilization. If we feed 100%, utilization goes right down there. So too much feeding also not very fruitful, other than manure and urines coming back to your land. Available forage, if there is so much forage available, you can do save. And stocking rate, also need to think about how much forage available. If a very high forage available, you need to put more animals. If little forage available, either supplement with hay and the feed or remove the animals from the plot. Just put a couple of animals there. Change stocking rate depending on the forage availability. And overgrazing, undergrazing should be avoided. I will just show you some of the scenario. If you do overgraze, parasite eggs and larvae will increase in the pasture. Pasture and soil will be damaged more, and animal performance goes down under the overstocking condition. And then over here, there is not much to eat. We still put animals there, and you see the situation of animal. I do not understock either, because they will select most palatable forages, they will trample, and less palatable forages will take over the field. So over here, some of the scenario, forage trample, and it is too late to graze also. So those kind of scenarios should be minimized or avoided. And stocking rate should always be maintained at the optimal zone. You see over here, this is the zone where the animal output, you see this vertical. And if we this is the overgrazing situation, this is undergrazing situation. So always put animals for the maximum benefit. Save extra forages for future use, make hay or stockpile, and we have already talked about strip grazing. If we have stockpile forages, then those plots should be utilized strip by strip, so you can have maximum forage utilized to feed the animals for a longer time. Be careful while grazing tree containing area. They just go and damage trees, debark trees, break trees. So we have also talked about it in our earlier sessions. So provision of good pasture and facilities are necessary before bringing animals into the plots. And you may develop and maintain a year-round pasture and grazing system. And animal requirements and available forages should be the consideration when you decide the stocking rate, number of animals to put per plot. Okay, so key point, have basic facilities for grazing successfully, that we talk about numerous facilities. Stop grazing when the recommended stubble height is reached, and the leaf volume 50%, that's the borderline. I mean bottom line, you may not want to remove more than 50% of the leaf volume. And grazing system depends on the forage species. Stocking rate depends on the available forages, and extra forage, except for future, either do the hay or stockpile those forages.